Hello and welcome to a new video. Today I'm going to be going over the pre-alpha trailer for Scorn shot by shot and seeing what could possibly be discerned from the clips within. Considering that the background for one video in the latest update has shown areas and assets that, if not from the pre-alpha area, are very similar to what can be found from the pre-alpha area and were likely carried over to the final product. I think it's worth going back and seeing what could possibly be discerned from this older build of the game. It's worth pointing out that this pre-alpha video actually contains a bit of lost Scorn history. Before trying their hand at Kickstarter, the developers made a sort of small demo area and sent it out to potential publishers who responded well to it, but said it's too weird for mainstream audiences. And the area in the pre-alpha trailer is the area that was part of that demo. Unfortunately, I don't think we will ever be able to get our hands on that demo and see how it plays, figure out what the puzzles are, and find differences between it and what the final game or even the eventual demo that was released to the public. You'll find those differences between them. So after an initial disclaimer that everything we see is pre-alpha, the video starts out with the camera slowly pulling away and rotating around a puckering wall anus. While not the most orthodox way to introduce a game, you certainly wouldn't see a scene like this in a trailer for an upcoming God of War game. It does drive home the biological nature of the environment and the Gigerian influences the game has. Hell, it's more sexual than anything we've seen so far in later trailers, all things considered. It also shows off how much detail is in the game, as this is just one small part of a larger wall of these things that will be used for a puzzle. The next shot focuses on two parts of the environment. The first is this chair with some sort of scoop that you might see on something like an excavator, and a sort of biological well in the ground. It might be too hard to see on YouTube, but behind all of that is a hammer asset, and to the right a new asset that we actually don't know anything remotely about. We are able to get a good look at a few of the assets due to them finding their way to ArtStation after the initial failure of Scorn's first attempt at Kickstarter. This particular one, with the grim name of Machine Execution, is shown in very rich detail here. One thing you'll notice is that a lot of the environment and machinery has this sort of whitish, webbish pattern that sort of glues it to the ground and sometimes glues parts of the machine to other parts of the machine, like the excavator part to the arm part. And it seems like this sort of webby, white, biological, whatever it is, will make its way to the final game in some form. I suppose it is the distinguishing biological growth of that particular area where all the red weed and fleshy clumps was the distinguishing biological growth for the demo area. Within the hole in the machine, it's possible to see multitudes of small, not exactly well organized, but different small holes that do seem to show off a pattern within them. and in the actual scooping part there's copious amounts of blood. This is kind of curious because it doesn't really look like the scooping part should be able to fit inside of the larger hole in the machine. One might expect it to sort of scrape away at a creature inside and let the blood drain into the back of the machine, but that doesn't seem to be the case, not only because it doesn't look like it can actually reach back there, but there's not any blood inside the machine at all. Some of you have probably noticed the wires on the underside of the crane part and running up along the back and sides of the machine. I think that this sort of implies, and this is a guess, but it sort of makes me think this machine here uses a system of hydraulics in order to move the various parts rather than anything more mechanical. As for the hammer thing in the background, that's about as much as we know about it. It's some weird hammer looking thing. We don't even know if it has any moving parts, though it does kind of look like it can sort of move up and down a little bit. The asset of it on ArtStation doesn't illuminate anything other than the small, slightly interesting fact that whoever built this thing abandoned the sort of gold and black aesthetics that the other machinery has in favor of a much larger metallic base for it. I also find it interesting that there seems to be these sort of root growths that are almost randomly sort of growing up the hammer and alongside of it, but there's the exact same material neatly wrapping around the handle of it, for lack of a better term, and producing a little design on the very flat top of it. Part of it looks like it's completely random and up to the forces of nature, and other parts of it look like there's intentional design behind it and something was manipulating how these things would grow. It's also worth pointing out that it looks like these things are growing out of a hole in the back of the hammer as well. Though I guess it is a genuine question, are they growing out of it or are they growing into it? The next interesting shot gives us a view of some sort of corridor with machinery within the walls. As you'll see later, this area has two distinct levels, an upper one with a little bridge and a control panel, and the bottom one with all this machinery in it, and I suspect that hallways like these are how Scorn Guy gets from the top level to the bottom one, rather than an elevator like we saw carry up the ceiling penis in the demo. But let's pay a little bit more attention to those machines there. The machines, all three of them, are exactly the same. They're this interestingly titled mold machine that has these tiny little arms that no one knows what they're used for, has a drainage in the center of it that, again, no one really knows what that would be used for, though it is interesting that there is one sort of drainage on the flat surface near the arms and where the poles end, and then there's another low drainage area at the floor of the machine, so whatever it handles might perhaps slip off of the top part and land on the bottom part, and whatever fluids it produces might need to be drained down there too. But how much this machine can do, given the very limited amount of area it has to actually manipulate anything, is certainly a question, and I'm not sure it would be a different mold named item we'll come across later in the pre-alpha trailer. The next shot in the trailer is this, which I have no idea what it's actually for. I could perhaps suspect that it's an alternate way for Scorn Guy to reach a different level. He walks up the sloped, fleshy surface to the second level up there, similar to how Mario can walk up walls if there's a slope in Mario Galaxy, or how the demonic catwalks work in Agony. It's very hard to see due to how dark the trailer is and low quality the video is, but there's a structure hanging, just a few meters above it. What that thing hanging over it is, who knows, and certainly not the concept art here, which prefers to focus on the main point of that clip in the gameplay video. It at least illuminates some new things, such as the fact that the bottom of the flesh is rocky and rotten, perhaps meaning it isn't a way for Scorn Guy to get up to the second level, and yet to the left of it looks like some sort of ramp. It's rather steep, but it could also be the way Scorn Guy gets up there, and it's just too dark to see in the actual trailer. The concept art also shows that there will be a relatively short roof over whatever surface is up there, though it is a rather massive rocky roof that has very likely been carved away by whatever entities have more or less built this place. There's a lot of cracks in not only the structure itself but also the roof, which is more indication that a lot of time has passed since anyone has been in this area. That seems to be a recurring theme in what we've seen in Scorn. I don't think Scorn Guy is going to run into any bustling metropolises or civilizations. Going forward, we see another set of identical assets, this time being these crane machines. It's a lot easier to guess how these things will work and move than the machine execution, but taking our eyes off of them for a moment, look at that little door at the right. Seems to lead into a tunnel, and there's a set of tracks leading into it as well. Now, so far we haven't really gotten a discernible scale for everything, but let me tell you, these things are quite massive. That guy standing on the left is very likely what's supposed to represent Scorn Guy's height, and if not that, I don't imagine Scorn Guy is any way significantly taller or shorter than the average man. We've seen in the demo and the gameplay trailer that Scorn people are capable of building things at ridiculous scales. The area Scorn Guy goes through here looks like it could house an entire neighborhood within it, and multiple of them if we're going by the different levels. And so I somewhat suspect that whatever built these things were the same species that built the facility in the demo and gameplay trailer. I'm inclined to think that every artificial structure is built by the same intelligent entities that Scorn Guy belongs to, and the discrepancies in how they look and the aesthetics could possibly be explained by when they were built in the history of the Scorn world, similar to how ancient Mesopotamia doesn't look like ancient Rome, which doesn't look like medieval England, which doesn't look like modern day New York. Different materials, better knowledge. Alternatively, it could be separate cultures. Maybe Scorn people have different factions where some people prefer to incorporate bone and metal together, while the ones who built the demo area prefer to minimize flesh as much as possible in favor of strictly stone and metal. And speaking of materials, the arm and head of the crane are rather interesting. They look far bonier than what we've seen on the machine execution, and almost look wooden to a degree. The video then cuts away to pan up at this asset known as the command center. The lower part is purely mechanical with very rigid, straight and geometric pipework, while the rest of it, looking sort of like the Iron Throne all things considered, is made up of this sort of rib cage, skeleton-esque bony structure that surrounds a single console. If the name didn't give it away, this is very likely where a Scorn guy would be manipulating the various machinery in the lower area of this enclosed structure. And just to show again just how big this crap is, here's another human being to scale. And more interesting, and going by the observation I made in different video, it's another ramp structure that gets you up to the top rather than stairs or a ladder. It seems that Scorn people agree with Valve's idea of game design when making TF2, that the best way to ascend or descend a structure is through ramps, rather than anything else. I find it very interesting that the sort of webbing stuff at the bottom that usually just looks like it glues the machine to the floor has actually been manipulated to produce this ramp. And the vines that seem to grow on all the other machines have been utilized to sort of keep the rib cage-esque back of the machine together. After a crawl through a hallway with the left side having a rocky material and the right side having small lights, and interestingly enough, that left side material is what is on the walls in the preview picture from the update. The video then sort of pans down from above, showing a partial bridge structure that has its own console on the right side, which indicates it's used to control something. And it also has a moment where the music really gets good in this trailer. I really hope that song makes it into the final product, or at least just the soundtrack. But anyways, next shot is of the command center and the bridge area, showing off just how large the area overall is. But since there's little tunnels surrounding it, it's not even a full picture. To the right, and hard to see, is something that kind of looks like a reddish vein crawling up a wall. And to the left, which is less hard to see, is that unknown pillar with flesh in the center. On the top of it are what looks like two identical metallic things. Immediately to the right of the command center, we can see that same tunnel that was near the cranes. And it's also possible to see that in the chaos of some biological structure, there is uniformity in how the lights are placed. The next shot is pretty important. It's Scorn Guy himself, or at least an early rendition of him. My, have graphics changed. Early Scorn Guy looks fairly different from the modern day rendition, but still keeps some key elements. His lungs have been moved further down in his body and appear to have been damaged in some way according to this concept art, similar to how modern Scorn Guy looks like he has gashes in his lower body. The helmet he wears doesn't have an enclosure on the chin like modern day Scorn guy, and the sides of it wrapping around his face looks far more artificial than what we will eventually get. Even the biological part doesn't look as veiny or thick as what will eventually be the player character. The outfit he wears, while still keeping that whole blending in with his biology thing, is a lot smoother and more grayish. It doesn't have as much texture or detail and lacks those weird tumor things wrapping near its lungs. His helmet also doesn't produce a weird tentacle thing that we can see hanging by Scorn Guy's lungs in the right side picture. Unlike the modern version of Scorn Guy, the old version's fleshy face is also a lot smoother and uniform. His back has all these little holes in it that are likely used to plug in some sort of machinery into him, maybe to feed him nutrients, maybe for him to control that machinery, who knows, but looks more akin to the sockets you would see on a plastic action figure more than anything, in my opinion. I think in light of the recent update, this picture carries a little bit more significance. It seems like the developers have always intended for Scorn Guy's hands and arms to rot away, or at least what parts of his arms aren't covered by some very thick, weirdly stonish metallic structure. Indeed, the old version of Scorn Guy has very weird proportions. His upper arms are thin, just light muscles wrapping around pure bones from the look of it, but his lower arms are covered in this weird machinery or outfit that doesn't seem to have any real biotechnological elements to them, at least not in the same vein as what we see in New Scorn Guy, overall making him look like Popeye a little bit. The next shot, which is a quick one, is of a door with rails leading into it, and a bunch of different cranes hanging off of the ceiling on the right side. What's cool is that we have this exact shot in picture form taken at a different angle, which lets us see that what's supposed to go on those rails is this little one-wheeled cart structure, and dumped on the left side of the wall are these weird buzzsaw things. We can also see what looks like a sort of circular object behind those buzzsaws that looks like a smaller version of the base for the crane asset. Above that is an oddly smooth surface with a bunch of little, what looks like buttons and levers on it. A lot of this is oddly smooth. Those pipes up on the top left side there are the smoothest, straightest thing I have ever seen in Scorn. So it's very likely these are just placeholders for the pre-alpha version, and they'll be more Scornified if they even appear in the final game when we come to visit this area, again if it actually does make an appearance. The door itself is this weird little igloo thing that's made up of a material very similar to wood. It has this red light emitting from it, which sort of makes it look like some sort of scanning device almost. And you can see the area where the smaller door part will open up and let the cart through. The buzzsaw blade also has an asset. It's part of a larger machine that's called the grindstone. And I think out of everything we've seen so far, this is probably the most easy to guess what it's used for and how it'll function. The next shot shows a first-person perspective of Scorn Guy walking on the bridge. This, other than the shot of him looking at his body, is the first of the bits in the trailer that actually shows what it would be like to play the game. The bridge has actually gone through quite a bit of change between the version in the trailer and its concept art. Most notably, the bridge no longer has that wrench-shaped fork at the end of it, but instead has just a general sort of circular finish. There's two separate control parts to the bridge rather than just one, and the bridge looks significantly thinner than it does in the final version. According to the ArtStation page that these pictures came from, the bridge is placed inside a huge dome high above the ground. High above the ground is pretty self-evident from what we've seen in the trailer so far, but now we also know the overall structure of the entire area. It's sort of like a cylinder that at the top of it has a tiny little dome in the center. It, like everything else we've seen so far, is pretty massive compared to the average person. The next shot is pretty interesting. We see Scorn Guy shove this key-bladed thing into a hole. While it may be a separate item, it's worth noting that the last key thing we've seen Scorn Guy use was embedded directly into his arm. Whoever built that place must understand the convenience of not having your lock opening devices submerged into your skin. Other than that, there seems to be two separate controls for this thing, one dial you turn and some black sphere. A final detail I want to point out is that when he shoves his arm in and the key reaches the end, the thing encasing his arm actually sort of jiggles a bit. The lower part does, or upper part I guess. The implication for this next shot is that shoving that key in that hole is what allows him to then control this arm crane here at the very top, which we have seen that particular crane arm in a different part of the trailer, and move around these gooey balls from one wall anus to another. This is the area surrounding the bridge, but from what I can tell, the exact thing he shoved that key into isn't on the bridge, which is why I say it only implies that this follows that previous clip logically. Based on what we see here, one could easily guess this is some sort of puzzle you'll have to solve in order to progress further in the game. Another trip through the hallway and we come across a familiar sight. There's a door, there's the cart, there's a claws hanging from the ceiling, but in addition to those claws on the right are the top parts of the machine execution seen down below. From what I can tell, it's the same area that we saw before, but some things have been added, or perhaps they are to be removed. Another shot of Scorn Guy shoving a key into a hole. Turning it seems to turn off the red light in the hole on the bottom right of the one he shoves it in. As far as I can tell, it's the exact same key, though it is kind of difficult to compare it because the previous shot is a lot faster than this one. The use of a very harsh red light is pretty interesting for this area. I'm not sure if it'll ever return in the final game, but it does sort of help bring a little bit of color to this otherwise very bleak brown and gray area. Then there's a shot of the bridge again, where we can sort of see the console that Scorn Guy uses to move those things on the wall, followed then by a shot of the opening leading to the bridge. Some people have said that the opening here kind of looks like the Assassin's Creed symbol, and I'm inclined to agree. There's a panning shot of this structure here known as the jacuzzi in the ArtStation asset. What it actually does, I don't know, but for whatever reason, ib Software decided to use concept art of it as their icon for YouTube. The next clip shows a very early model of the gun Scorn guy uses, specifically the pistol variant. It's actually kinda nice that it's there, cause we get to see just how much has changed as far as the graphical fidelity goes since a pre-alpha trailer. So if anything else in this trailer does appear in the later game, we can be very well assured that might not even begin to resemble what we've seen in the pre-alpha version. But take note of how he's handling the pistol. At no point in any of the other trailers or demo does he hold the pistol up like that. It could have been done specifically for the trailer to show it off, but it could also be the animation that plays when he first finds it, assuming he doesn't start out in the game with it equipped already. A final minor thing to note is some tunnel looking area in the background. No wait, there's one more thing. I don't understand why that forked prong at the bottom of the pistol is so consistent in all of the trailers but removed from the demo. The next clip shows him going through the tunnel, possibly the same one that was in the pistol clip. But blink and you'll miss it, there's one very important piece to it. It looks like somehow, against all the odds, the Scorn people managed to get one of the carts stuck on some stalagmite, the only one in this whole tunnel. Given how we've seen carts before, getting it down is probably part of a puzzle. And when you do get it down, it's apparently going to be used to transport Moldman somewhere. This is actually a pretty interesting location in of itself. We see two of those machine execution things in the background and two of those circular holes that were seen in a different part of the trailer. Given the tunnel look of the area, it doesn't seem to take place in that very open space with the command center. Additionally, Moldman seems to be lifted up by the arm of the crane, but the rest of the machine is nowhere to be found. The arm is instead attached to a ceiling railing, though it's kind of hard to see in the clip. But given where the ceiling railing is going, and the name of the machine execution, well, I don't think Moldman is about to have a very good time. The camera takes us through another tunnel, but what's interesting about this is that it's a lot more closed off than any of the other ones we've seen so far. Pure speculation, but I kinda wonder if this is the first tunnel you go through before you enter in to the larger room and see the command center in its glory. We get a shot of Moldman attached to the crane swinging around, while the machine execution waves its excavator in anticipation for what it's about to do. Moldman already doesn't look like he's having much fun. He's trapped inside this weird biological sack. His limbs are distorted in unnatural positions. One of his legs looks distinctly broken. Through what could be considered his neck and chest is a large gash, and yet there is nothing in it, nothing pouring out. There's no blood or organs or viscera. He's closer to a fetus than a full-grown being, and yet he would stand about as tall as Scorn Guy based on the proportions we can see so far. It could even be, as wild as it may seem, that this is either the initial idea for how Scorn people were supposed to form, literally molded inside of these sacks, or it could be a degenerate variation of Scorn people, a failure, a factory error. This is what was produced before they decided to go back to the drawing board and utilize a grow people out of walls idea. And no matter how ancient this area may actually be, no matter how much dust it collects and how much the machinery might break down, Moldman here was likely there to witness it all in mostly silent agony. Its face, if you can even call it that, consists of 2 eyes and a slit, running from the very top of where its nose would be to the bottom of its chin. In this picture we also get a better look at just how incomplete of a being he is. Everything about him, from his head being rotated wrong, to him not having a distinctive left shoulder, to him not really having much of an upper body, and at least one not connected to his head, just screams him being wrong in some way. Even the developers seem to hold him in some sort of disdain. When asked on Kickstarter if Moldman will return, one of the devs who usually responds to people asked for clarification of who he is, and when somebody posted a picture of him, the developer said, "Oh, that thing? No." Alas, it seems Moldman is lost to the ages of Scorn, never to find peace or happiness. The penultimate shot of the trailer is of him thrashing his head around as much as he possibly could and wheezing in desperation. Also, one of his eyes falls out. In fact, it might even be that both of them fall out. But it kinda seems like he's aware of what his fate is going to be. I'm sorry, Moldman. You deserved better. Oh, that was kind of an adventure, but there's still more to talk about. I mentioned it in my breakdown of the reveal trailer, but I'll mention it here as well. Among the different assets that appear in the pre-alpha trailer, one of the assets, specifically the fleshy exhaust from the opening of the reveal trailer, is among them, which to me indicates that these probably were intended to appear in that general area. So it comes to question why we didn't see them in the pre-alpha trailer. One of the earliest concept arts is of these 3 heads, which again don't appear in the pre-alpha trailer. It may be a scrapped idea, or it may actually appear in the game, but I would assume they're significant in some way, though I don't know how they would be. Do you communicate with them? And if so, how, considering neither Scorn Guy nor any of these things have mouths? Is there a distinction between these heads? One tells the truth, one tells a lie, one goes either way? Who knows? Fun fact, the pre-alpha trailer and probably the demo that accompanied it was originally done in Unity. It wasn't until between the closure of their initial Kickstarter to the reveal trailer that they switched over to Unreal Engine 4. Based on those 2 holes, as well as the machine execution and the ceiling pole as well as the text test Moldman eyes on the left, about 2 bits of text below the highlighted one. I would say that this specific scene is where Moldman is being carried along by the crane head. It's too dark to see what those holes in the ground are, but one compilation of concept art shows a structure that is very similar to it, that has all these different grinding mechanisms in the center. Maybe rather than machine execution, Moldman was going to be dropped into that. The bottom picture of that collection is especially interesting though. It clearly shows the back of Scorn Guy, that's undisputable, but the landscape he's viewing is peculiar to say the least. Not because it looks surreal or strange or outworldly, but because it doesn't. As opposed to the harsh orange, yellowish desert area with various strange red outcrops and a bunch of tombstone-shaped air vents jutting around everywhere, we instead see a vast, perhaps a rocky landscape, perhaps a landscape covered in some greenery, but nonetheless, while not very inviting looking, it does look quite hospitable. It looks more like uncharted territory, unclaimed land. There just doesn't seem to be any evidence of any civilization anywhere in the picture. And for a game that mostly takes place in areas that were clearly built either through machinery or bioengineering by intelligent designers, seeing something so natural, so untampered with, is a very unusual sight. I don't know if we will see an area like this in the final game, something so vast with a bunch of greens and blues in it. But if we don't, then I think it would be pretty cool if they did this sort of concept art, but with a modern version of Scorn Guy and a more updated landscape. It still is a very, impactful picture. Those are some very supremely somber tapestries we've got here. The last thing I want to talk about is this picture. It's a different angle of the scene where we see the 2 cranes. But what I want to focus on is specifically in the background, though it might be hard to see. It's underneath the furthest crane and to the left of the command center. That stony outgrowth on the wall there seems to have this strange red moss growing over it. It's interesting because we haven't really seen biological growth other than what is gluing all these different machineries to the floor, and those have always been sort of whitish and yellowish. The red of the parts with the crane is due to lighting, but based on what I can see in the background, it doesn't look like the red of that fleshy stuff is due to lighting. I'm sure by now we're all aware of the bears from the gameplay trailer and the demo who are responsible for a bunch of red flesh stuff basically coating everything in the facility Scorn Guy walks through. And I'm not saying that any of those creatures have managed to find their way in here and would have been an enemy in the demo to shoot at, but I do think there might be something that's responsible for that crap being on the walls. Overall, it's a rather interesting trailer, and everything we've seen just makes it all the more a shame that whatever demo Ebb Software pitched to people may never actually see the light of day. Even though other studios and investors probably didn't think the game would take off, that has since been shown to be completely wrong based on the fanfare it's received, especially since the reveal trailer. Maybe after the game is released and everything is said and done, we'll see it, but until then, it's a mystery. So until then, I hope you enjoyed the video, that gave you something to think about and otherwise entertained you. And also remember, Mold Man deserved better. Anyways, take care.